All right, everybody. So this is a little video just for anybody in our broader CKC community who's interested in learning more about Hurricane Helene and the effects on our area. I know that many areas from Florida up through Tennessee and beyond were impacted. Our prayers and thoughts are with everybody, and our prayers are with everybody in the aftermath of Milton in Florida as well. But just to focus on our little corner of the garden and focus on Southern Appalachia particularly, I invited Garrett, who is an old friend of Camps Catalina and Chosatonga. He was a staff member, camper, program director at Chosatonga. But now he's got a unique position where he may be able to teach us a little bit about what made this storm so unique. And I have some questions for you, Garrett, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
Yeah. First off, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you
So,
do.
as Adam mentioned, my name's Garrett Graham. I grew up here in Brevard, North Carolina, and moved back here about 4 years ago. I work actually over in Asheville at a climatology research institute over there with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so NOAA. They run the National Weather Service, they run the National Hurricane Center, they run a lot of different entities. I don't work with either of those first two entities that I told you I just mentioned. I work with another one. But I actually focus on ocean temperatures and modeling ocean temperatures for the United States. So I'm a former camper, former staff member at CHOS, former program director over there. Chosatonga is where I learned how to kayak, which is one of my main hobbies. I spend a ton of time whitewater kayaking, racing whitewater kayaks on the rivers here in the southeast, and especially in Western North Carolina. So I spent a lot of my weekends on rivers. And then in addition to that, the sort of final piece of the puzzle for how I was sort of involved with Helene or how Helene impacted me was I volunteer as an EMT and as a firefighter for a local fire station. A lot of the fire stations around here are volunteer based because there's just not enough of a tax base in order to hire full-time professionals. And turns out they'll take anybody with a reasonable amount of training. So now I'm a nationally certified or nationally I'm part of the National Register of EMTs, and I've done just enough firefighting training that they'll allow me to actually get on a hose. I assist with that kind of stuff and with search and rescue through the department. So those are kind of the between being a scientist who studies things that, studies the climate, studies climate change, um, being a volunteer firefighter and an EMT in the area, and then being a kayaker spends a lot of time on the rivers. I kind of got to see Helene from all these different unique angles.
What made this storm so severe? We've obviously had lots of storms in the past, and the mountains flood a little bit every year, sometimes more than other times. But what made this particular storm, Helene, so destructive?
So it's a great question. Hurricanes in the mountains, very rare event. And it turns out that they're very destructive when they do happen. So, to put this in a little bit of historical context, the last time there's an event like this and a flood of this scale here in Western North Carolina was actually, you have to go back over 100 years to 1916. And in 1916, that was the last time we recorded floods anywhere close to this scale. And in that case, it actually was not one hurricane that hit in Western North Carolina, but two different hurricanes back to back that hit um, within about 3 days of each other, one from the Gulf and then one from the Atlantic. And that first hurricane that hit Western North Carolina served as what's called a precursor event. Um, that my understanding from my meteorologist colleagues at work is that's the technical term. You have a precursor event. It's a storm that goes ahead and comes in and saturates the ground with rain, gets the rivers all you know gets their levels up a lot, and basically sets the stage for the second storm to come in and sort of finish the job. And that's essentially what happened with this. That's what happened in with us this time around as well, except instead of two hurricanes, it just took one really big hurricane and a slightly smaller storm beforehand. So beforehand, in the couple days leading up to Hurricane Helene hitting us, we had a rain event, just a rainstorm that
Yeah.
lasted for about 2 days, and it saturated the ground. It not out of the ordinary. It was very normal type of rain event for Western North Carolina for the most part.
It was
But
heavy though. The rivers were
it
high.
it was heavy. It was a big storm, but not like some, yeah, it wasn't like a crazy big storm.
Got it.
But the problem was is that it really set the stage for Helene to come in and just dump immense amounts of water on us, and for that water to not have anywhere to go. Um,
Sure.
so that's kind of the setting the stage, like why, what were the events leading up that made this so bad. The next thing that made it really bad is uh that the water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico are at record highs. They've never they're close to their all-time record highs for this time of year. We've seen this. I run one of the US's ocean temperature models that we use for actually figuring out what the ocean temps are anywhere on the globe. And the last couple of years, we've just seen the temperatures just ratcheting up and ratcheting up and ratcheting up. Hurricanes, their fuel is the difference in between how much thermal energy or heat energy the ocean surface has, the difference between that and their cloud tops. So their cloud tops are really, really cold. They can be like -80 Fahrenheit.
Hmm.
And the ocean surface, or -60 to -80 Fahrenheit. The ocean surface is, the hotter it is, the more heat energy it holds, and the more powerful and bigger hurricanes can get. Couple that with a hotter atmosphere, the hurricanes can hold more water, i.e., more rain, in their clouds. And so you get Helene, which was reforming or really intensifying over the Gulf of Mexico, which has record, or not record high temps right, really big, and then because of the hotter atmosphere, it can hold more moisture. And so we had one precursor event, which was a pretty good rainstorm, followed by one absolutely enormous hurricane coming up and hitting us. So that's kind of the second thing that, or we have the precursor event, we have a much bigger, angrier, meaner hurricane,
Mm.
and then lastly, the thing that we all love about Western North Carolina is you got big, beautiful mountains. And unfortunately, those mountains, when it comes to a hurricane, actually can be a pretty big disadvantage, because unlike Florida or Louisiana or the Gulf Coast of any of our Gulf Coast states, one thing we know about all those is they're very flat and very even. Um, so when a hurricane hits them, other than the hurricane's eye, which is the engine of the hurricane, being disrupted and the hurricane starting to fall apart and weaken, um, it'll cause some additional precip. It'll cause some changes. I'm not a hurricane expert, so I can't really speak exactly to what's going on there. But the other thing about the terrain is that since it's flat, the water tends to spread out a lot more evenly. It won't be perfectly even because the ground's not perfectly flat. But when you look at the mountains, the two things that happen when a hurricane hits the mountains is that, one, the mountains actually physically push the storm system up higher into the atmosphere, because the storm system comes in, hits the mountains, gets pushed up, and there's this. A lot of us have heard about the rain shadows,
Mhm.
and the technical term for that is orographic lifting. We don't need to know that. What we do need to know about is that when those clouds get pushed up higher for a variety of reasons, it causes them essentially to cool off. The rain condenses and it dumps rain right on top of the mountains. So mountains can help wring out more rain from a hurricane,
I
or any
see.
storms. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that since the mountains are not flat, water runs downhill.
Mhm.
So unlike low-lying areas where water will spread out, in the mountains, you can actually get much, much more concentrated damage, because the water is going to run downhill into the rivers. The rivers are just will swell immensely in a very short period of time, and so you can get really devastating flash flooding.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, two rivers of note that I'm sure you might bring up later, but the Nolichucky River that runs out of the high country of North Carolina through eastern Tennessee, and you told me that you just drove through there, and then the French Broad, which drains our county and the surrounding counties that down through Buncombe County and out into Tennessee, which eventually runs into the Tennessee River, the Ohio River, the Mississippi. These rivers were, I imagine all-time highs. I mean, the Nolichucky was running, they estimated over 160,000 cubic feet per second. And, we had discussed that the French Broad was at least that high, probably higher. And I mean, for someone who's like, oh yeah, what does that mean? Cubic feet per second. So the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon will typically run somewhere between 8 and 15,000 cubic feet per second on a normal day. So for a relatively small river in Western North Carolina to be running more than 10 times the flow of the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, you can imagine that those are just immense flows. The typical
Yeah.
of rivers that are draining much, much larger areas than that. So that helps put some of the destruction, I think, in perspective.
Yeah.
We're
And or keep on going.
no, please finish your thought, and then
I
I
was
have
going to
another
say, and
question for
in
you.
addition, you mentioning like the French Broad or the Nolichucky rivers. The other thing that helps to know is like, okay, so Adam said, you said 160,000 cubic feet per second was the flow going through like Irwin, Tennessee, a town that got devastated by parts of which got devastated by the Nolichucky River. Usually, when the Nolichucky River is going through there, it's at 1,600 CFS or so. So basically, the volume of the river went up by 100x, 100 times. So the river was literally 100 times bigger than it typically is.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the French Broad, and the French Broad right before the French Broad River, which flows through Brevard and then Asheville. Just before this was hovering right around like basically 200 CFS, and then it went up to we probably close to 200,000. So, it was anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times larger than it typically is. I'm sorry. It was close to 2,000 CFS and the same spot. I was like, no. So up here in the county, it basically boosted the volume basically boosted by about 100x as well, which is just devastating.
This is mine, but I remember sitting at a diner with you after we ran the Nolichucky one day, and you told me that some of our good friends were expecting a baby for the first time, and I have a lot of great memories. And these rivers and these gorges, and like you and so many others, an event like this it really hits hard because so many of these places are not going to be the same. Okay, well, okay, thank you. So huge rainfall event. You didn't mention the wind, but we did have hurricane force winds, right? Like 80 to
Yeah,
100
we had,
mile per hour winds.
yeah, I think technically we had like tropical storm force winds, which
Okay.
gusted up to even more stuff because it would get even higher because it would get channelized and compressed in mountain valleys and up going up slopes.
Hmm.
So intensely destructive. The soil liquefied in many places. So trees, a lot of the trees that are down, were actually just big, healthy trees with normal roots.
Yeah.
They just didn't have anything to grab onto anymore. And then these winds would rip through valleys and uproot those trees, rip all the leaves off. One thing that's wild looking around is a lot of the south facing slopes have no leaves left on them, while the north facing
Wow.
slopes still have leaves, and that's because the storm came from the south and hit the southern slopes first. Um, just wild to see.
Huh. Okay. Well, thanks for that context. That helps understand a little bit more about how this storm is impacting you. And so you're in Transylvania County now. You're working in Buncombe County, which is experiencing considerable chaos still. But this and the scale of this is roughly over the area of say like Massachusetts. It's a grand scale in Western North Carolina in the mountains. Those areas that are impacted. Tell me a little bit about where you were during the storm. So you mentioned that you're involved with volunteering for emergency services, fire departments, and you're an EMT. What did it look like for you to be assisting during the storm and in the aftermath?
So watching the reports come in or the predictions, the regional or the regional and county emergency management services all started were taking the National Weather Service's predictions very, very seriously. None of us had any sort of concept about, we knew how much they were predicting, but none of us had a concept about what that would actually translate to really in terms of on the ground what things would look like. But because of that, a lot of us volunteered to stay the night at our respective like emergency stations. So I volunteered to stay the night at the night before the storm. I was sleeping at the department where I volunteer in Transylvania County. We were running around the night before the storm trying to tell our district to evacuate.
Hmm.
We went around. We started again at 6 a.m. On Friday morning, and then basically 7 a.m. hit, and it was game on. It was just absolutely wild. The huge amounts of rain dumping, winds just gusting around, ripping trees up. At a couple different points, I thought it really felt like the end of the world. It was
Hmm.
pretty crazy to see because there was water rising and gushing from places that I've just never seen water come from in the mountains, like literally just bursting out of slopes, or rushing around people's houses where there's not even, a river would form and rush around like a group of houses where there's not even a ditch or a culvert to drain water there. Like there's just no creek nearby, but just so much water was coming down that there are times when there are full blown rivers rushing past us for an hour or so, where it's like I've never seen this before. There's not even a ditch here. Um, Portions we were witnessing small landslides starting left and right.
You guys
Just
are seeing that, you and the
yes,
rescue team.
yeah, we'd be driving along and there'd just be a bus, like a small landslide just sloughing off on the side of the road and coming down. We were trying to keep emergency lanes open by cutting trees out of the way through main routes through our district. And while we would do that, other trees would come down behind us, more trees would come down in front of us. It was just at one point a tree came down on two of our guys and almost injured one of them. The other one, it injured not severely, but we were incredibly worried about him because um, he's doing all right. He's recovering now, but we thought it had really hurt him. We had to go out and get him in the middle of the storm.
Hmm.
Uh, Power lines were getting severed and starting house fires, or structure fires. It was really crazy for about, a solid probably 6 hours while the storm was going over us. And after the storm left, it was it started becoming clear just how much damage had been done. Bridges were washed. We had bridges in our district washed out. One valley that has about 60 households in it. Close to about 180 to 200 people live up in this valley. Their only bridge and out of the valley got washed out, and so
Hmm.
they could hike out, but they couldn't actually they couldn't actually drive out themselves. And there are trees down everywhere in there. So there were a lot of residents in our district that for days afterwards we had to hike food and water into. Um, we had to make sure that they were stocked up on any sort of medicines that they needed. That we were able to get people out if they or get two people in case of emergency. It was just it was a lot for about a week.
Yeah. Well, given, given the difficulty of vehicle access to a lot of these places, it's incredible that y'all were able to get, I'm sure, insulin and, diapers, baby food, things like this to more vulnerable populations in the county. And I know that this is not unique to you. There's I don't know, a dozen, 15 counties that were really severely hit in Western North Carolina, and lots of roads are still out of commission. Areas are inaccessible, and they've had to be removed by helicopter, or they've had to be hiked out. I know there's mule teams working across the mountains right now. So it's a crazy time. That's wild. That's a wild story. Okay, so we're approaching the end of our slot here. How can people help, and what does recovery look like, if you can, in 2 minutes or less?
Yeah.
What are the key things to focus on as people want to help? We have a lot of people in our community reaching out to say, what can we do? What can be done in the months to come?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first off, recovery here, the rescue phase was just so impressive to watch. We had here in our county and in all the surrounding counties, the emergency services had an immense amount of support from the county governments, the state government, and the federal government. We actually had a National Guard unit helping us extract extract that guy, like our firefighter who got trapped under that tree
Wow.
um, in the middle of the storm. So it's been really remarkable watching everybody assist with the rescue efforts, getting supplies in. We've gotten massive amounts of supplies from out of state, or from I'm sorry, from like the federal level and the state level to distribute. So everybody throughout this storm really, we just witnessed all these different systems pulling together. We witnessed the outpouring from local churches, absolutely incredible. The outpouring, the volunteerism of private citizens, amazing. Really a truly great example of, and from what I can tell, from my corner of Western North Carolina, of the American system, which is both, bottom up meets top down. The American system really working. This is not the 2005, FEMA of Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
So how do we help now? Well, we're all really back into we're into the recovery phase in most places. A lot of that recovery involves really big things that private citizens or even teams of private citizens probably aren't very well equipped to do, like rebuilding large bridges or rebuilding roads that you have to blast into the mountainside for.
Yeah.
Uh, However, there's a lot of practical things that can be done. So it's getting cold here. Winter is starting to set in. We're solidly in fall now. So winter coats, winter gear, a lot of places that a lot of people who lost everything don't necessarily have, they don't have those things anymore. When they evacuated, it was warm and very wet. Um, so finding local organizations, especially through the camps that are collecting items like that, that's a great thing to do. Another thing, and I would say probably even larger, is probably donating money to these organizations, because the needs on the ground are very fluid. Sometimes they're starting to settle out, but it cash at this point, donating cash to trusted organizations is very helpful, because a lot of times that needs to be used to pay rent for a family or to help rebuild a house. So those are things that can be done to help out with the recovery in the area.
Sounds great. Okay, Garrett, thanks for the insight. Thanks for your vision and your experience. It's wild what you've experienced. Yeah, I will include some links with the video for Change Lives Now, Operation Airdrop, Catholic Charities for the Diocese of Charlotte, and Samaritan's Purse. So if you want to look into those areas, you can. And yeah, heed Garrett's word on how to help. Garrett, thank you so much. God bless you.
Hey, right back at you. See you.
Bye.